3 children died inside their Massachusetts home. Their mother survived. And more than 3 years later, a jury is being asked to answer a question far more complicated than who was responsible. Lindsay Clancy is standing trial in Plymouth, Massachusetts, in connection with the January 2023 deaths of her 3 young children. What happened to the children is not the central dispute at this trial. The battle is over Lindsay Clancy's state of mind. Prosecutors argue that her actions were intentional and planned. Her defense argues that she was suffering from severe postpartum mental illness, including postpartum psychosis, and was not criminally responsible for what she did. Now jurors are hearing about months of psychiatric treatment, severe insomnia, intrusive thoughts, changing medications and conversations between Clancy, her husband, and medical professionals. And testimony unfolding in court right now is raising new questions about what doctors and psychiatric providers observed before the 24th of January 2023. Was this murder committed with criminal intent or the catastrophic result of a severe psychiatric crisis? That's the question at the heart of Commonwealth v. Lindsay Clancy, and this is where the story begins. The 24th of January, 2023 began as an ordinary winter day for the Clancy family. By that evening, everything had changed. Lindsay and Patrick Clancy were at their home in Duxbury, Massachusetts, with their 3 young children. According to Patrick's testimony, Lindsay asked him to leave the house to pick up takeout food. While he was out, she also texted him asking him to stop at CVS for medication for one of the children. Patrick later testified that when he spoke with Lindsay by phone from the store, nothing in the conversation warned him of what he was about to discover. Prosecutors now argue those errands were significant. They allege Lindsay deliberately sent Patrick away, creating a window of time when she would be alone with the children. Patrick later testified that when he spoke with Lindsay by phone from the store, nothing in the conversation warned him of what he was about to discover. Prosecutors now argue those errands were significant. They allege Lindsay deliberately sent Patrick away, creating a window of time when she would be alone with the children. The defense sees that period very differently. They argue Lindsay's actions cannot be understood without considering the severe psychiatric symptoms they say she had been experiencing. When Patrick returned home, he encountered an emergency. His 3 children were inside the house, and Lindsay was seriously injured outside after going through a second-floor window. The events inside that home would eventually become the center of a murder trial and a battle over Lindsay Clancy's state of mind. What happened during the short period Patrick Clancy was away from the house is now at the center of the prosecution's case. Prosecutors say Lindsay Clancy intentionally sent her husband out on errands, giving herself time alone with their 3 children, 5-year-old Cora, 3-year-old Dawson, and 8-month-old Callan. The prosecution alleges that during that period, Lindsay killed all 3 children. We will not recreate those acts here. Prosecutors argue that what happened was not spontaneous. They say the errands, the timing, and Lindsay's actions before and afterward demonstrate planning and intent. But the defense does not dispute that Lindsay caused her children's deaths. Instead, it disputes why. Her attorneys argue that Lindsay was experiencing a catastrophic psychiatric episode involving postpartum psychosis, and that she was not criminally responsible for her actions. That distinction is crucial, because this trial isn't simply asking jurors to reconstruct what happened inside the Clancy home. It's asking them to determine what was happening inside Lindsay Clancy's mind when it happened. The 6th of December, 2022. Less than 2 months before the deaths, Lindsay and Patrick Clancy attended a psychiatric appointment together. Rebecca Gelada, the psychiatric nurse practitioner treating Lindsay, testified that something about Lindsay's symptoms concerned her. Lindsay had reportedly experienced serious sleep problems, racing thoughts, and difficulty concentrating. Gelada told jurors that the possibility of an underlying bipolar disorder was on her mind. Then came a response that is now receiving attention during the trial. According to Gelada's testimony, Patrick said, "My wife is not bipolar." Gelada testified that Lindsay looked at her but did not respond. Boston.com +1. The discussion did not establish a bipolar diagnosis at that appointment. Gelada also testified that during her treatment of Lindsay, she did not observe psychosis, and Lindsay never told her she had a plan to harm her children. AP News. But Lindsay's difficulties continued. The following day, according to Gelada, Lindsay contacted her through the patient portal after another difficult night and wrote that she really need help. By December 2022, Lindsay Clancy's struggle was no longer limited to sleepless nights and anxiety. Testimony now being heard by the jury describes a period when her symptoms became increasingly serious. Psychiatric nurse practitioner Rebecca Gelada testified that Clancy reported persistent and intrusive thoughts of suicide, but according to the testimony, there was an important distinction. Clancy reported suicidal thoughts, yet providers said she did not describe an active plan to take her own life, and she did not tell them she intended to harm her children. Her treatment continued to change as she sought relief from insomnia, anxiety, and intrusive thoughts. Jurors have also heard about attempts to find a higher level of psychiatric care, including partial hospitalization and later inpatient treatment. The defense argues this period shows a woman becoming increasingly psychiatrically unwell. Prosecutors point to providers who testified they did not observe psychosis or mania during important encounters. Both sides are looking at the same medical history, but asking the jury to draw very different conclusions from it. And just weeks later, Lindsay would enter one of America's best-known psychiatric hospitals, the 1st of January 2023. Just weeks before the deaths of her children, Lindsay Clancy entered McLean Hospital seeking inpatient psychiatric treatment. For nearly 5 days, doctors observed her mood, sleep, behavior, and suicidal thoughts. Psychiatrist Dr. Alia Goodhart testified that Clancy was depressed and had experienced suicidal thoughts, but said she had not described a suicide plan. According to Goodhart, Clancy identified her children and family as reasons she would not act on those thoughts. Doctors considered several possibilities, including postpartum depression, bipolar disorder, and postpartum psychosis. But Goodhart testified that she did not observe evidence of psychosis during Clancy's stay. She ultimately diagnosed Clancy with severe major depressive disorder without psychotic features. People.com. On January 5th, Lindsay was discharged. Goodhart testified that she was comfortable with the discharge, provided Lindsay received prompt follow-up care. CT Insider. But the defense has challenged aspects of that treatment. Under cross-examination, Goodhart acknowledged that McLean had not obtained Lindsay's prior psychiatric records before developing the treatment plan. 19 days after Lindsay left McLean Hospital, her 3 children would be dead. And now, the jury must decide what this hospital stay actually tells them about her mental state. Lindsay Clancy left McLean Hospital on January 5. 19 days remain before the deaths of her children. But leaving the hospital did not mean her psychiatric treatment was over. In the following weeks, Lindsay continued seeing providers as they tried to address her depression, anxiety, and problems with sleep. According to records discussed around the case, by January 16, she was described as depressed and emotionally flat, with little motivation and feelings of numbness. Then came January 23, the day before the deaths. Lindsay attended what would become her final psychiatric appointment before the tragedy. Her psychiatrist's records described her as more anxious, with a flat and anxious mood. But accounts of that appointment indicate she did not report suicidal or homicidal thoughts, and her providers had not documented observing psychosis during their treatment. The next day, Patrick Clancy would later testify, Lindsay appeared to be having one of her better days. BostonGlobe.com. Yet before that evening was over, all 3 children would be critically injured. For jurors, those final 19 days raise a difficult question. What, if anything, did the people treating Lindsay Clancy miss? This is where we clearly present the prosecution's side. Prosecutors argue that Lindsay Clancy was experiencing mental health problems but was nevertheless capable of acting intentionally and should be held criminally responsible. They characterize Patrick's errands as a ruse to get him out of the house. AP News +1. Narrator approximately 1 minute. The defense says psychiatric illness explains what happened. Prosecutors are asking the jury to reach a very different conclusion. They argue Lindsay Clancy knew what she was doing on the 24th of January, 2023, and acted intentionally. One of their central arguments concerns Patrick's trip away from the house. Lindsay asked him to pick up takeout and then requested medication from a pharmacy. Prosecutors characterize those errands as a ruse, a way to get Patrick out of the home so Lindsay would be alone with the children. They are also presenting witnesses who interacted with Lindsay before the deaths. Friends, relatives, and colleagues have described a woman who was clearly struggling with insomnia, anxiety, and medication problems, but who could also appear outwardly normal, attend family events, and care for her children. Prosecutors have emphasized that witnesses did not report hearing Lindsay talk about voices or tell them she intended to kill her children. Their argument is not that Lindsay had no mental health problems. It's that mental illness and lack of criminal responsibility are not automatically the same thing. The prosecution says she acted intentionally. The defense says she was experiencing psychosis, and that difference could determine the verdict. Now we present the defense's position just as clearly as we presented the prosecution's. Lindsay Clancy has pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, and her attorneys argue that she was suffering from postpartum psychosis and bipolar disorder when she killed the children. A forensic psychiatrist diagnosed those conditions after the killings. Narrator approximately 1 minute. The prosecution sees planning. The defense sees a woman whose connection to reality had collapsed. Lindsay Clancy's attorneys argue that by the 24th of January, 2023, she was suffering from severe postpartum psychosis. Their case points to months of psychiatric problems, crippling insomnia, depression, anxiety, intrusive thoughts, suicidal thinking, repeated medication changes, and eventually inpatient psychiatric treatment. The defense also points to Lindsay's own writings. Her diary documented desperation, what she described as brain fog, struggles with sleep, and fears surrounding her mental health. Her attorneys argue that these weren't simply signs of a mother under stress. They say Lindsay had lost touch with reality and was experiencing psychosis when she killed her children. But that argument faces a major challenge. Several clinicians who treated Lindsay before January 24 testified that they did not observe psychosis and that she had not told them she intended to harm her children. AP News +1, the defense argues those providers didn't have the complete picture. Under cross-examination, Lindsay's lawyers have questioned communication between providers, the completeness of her medical records, and how her medications were managed. So, which picture will the jury believe the woman clinicians saw before January 24, or the psychiatric explanation developed after the killings? After weeks of testimony, the case ultimately comes down to one question. Was Lindsay Clancy criminally responsible for what she did? Both sides agree that Lindsay caused the deaths of her 3 children. What they fiercely dispute is her mental state. The defense argues that severe postpartum mental illness left her unable to properly understand reality or control her actions. Prosecutors argue that despite her documented mental health struggles, her behavior demonstrates that she understood what she was doing and remained criminally responsible. Under Massachusetts law, the prosecution must prove criminal responsibility beyond a reasonable doubt once the issue has been properly raised. So jurors must weigh months of medical records, psychiatric testimony, Lindsay's behavior, Patrick's testimony, and the events of January 24. Was this the deliberate act prosecutors describe, or was Lindsay experiencing the psychiatric break from reality described by her defense? The jury, not public opinion, will have to decide. As this documentary ends, Lindsay Clancy's trial is not over. Witnesses are still taking the stand, evidence is still being presented, and there is no verdict yet. Lindsay admits that she killed her 3 children, but she has pleaded not guilty to the murder charges on the grounds that she was not criminally responsible. Her defense says severe postpartum mental illness and psychosis overwhelmed her ability to understand reality. Prosecutors argue something very different, that Lindsay was mentally ill, but still understood her actions and deliberately created an opportunity to be alone with her children. Now a jury must decide between those competing explanations. This case has become about more than what happened inside a Duxbury home on the 24th of January 2023. It asks an extraordinarily difficult legal question. When does severe mental illness remove criminal responsibility? Until the jury answers that question, Lindsay Clancy remains presumed innocent of the charges against her. What do you think the evidence presented so far shows? This is Official Verdict Room TV, where we follow the evidence, not the rumors. Subscribe, because we'll be following this trial through the verdict. The prosecution says Clancy planned the killings, while her defense argues postpartum psychosis and bipolar disorder made her not criminally responsible.